Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Uber Kudero show for this week's episode. And today we're going to be talking a little about something different that we haven't discussed. It's going to be a little less political economy and more of an anthropological lens onto development studies. And I hope you're going to stay with me because I'm going to be doing a lecture that compares um, kind of complicates how we think about development a little bit. And I want you to stay with me. So uh, here I'm going to share with my screen with you, and then you can follow up what I'm doing. And the topic that I'm discussing is the differences between Western values and African values and our understanding of what we normally call development. And before I proceed on, I'd like to say that this show has been taken over by a radio station, has been picked up by a radio station in Miami, driven by DJ Kerry Pastaina, who hosts it every day at the blackatlanticradio.com. So you can check it out there if you miss an episode. Be also sure to subscribe and share our material here so that I can expand and continue to do this. The more audience, the better. So now let's talk about development, and let's contextualize it from an African perspective, cultural perspective, and a Western view. And just before I go on, I'd like to say that to be say in advance that there's incredible nuance when talking about Africa because it's not one place, and our scholarly discussion mostly depend on a general understanding of of the whole idea, and it doesn't go in particular to the details that are pretty much relevant and should be taken care of in a discussion about Africa. So let's go to the objectives, which is to, one of the things that I'm going to do is to read 3 articles. One will be talking about the logic behind corruption, HIV, and the idea of civilization in regards to case studies from South Africa, Ghana, and Namibia. And also to understand how cultural miscommunication creates resistance towards Western initiated development, and to rethink our biases, worldview, privileges, and how they shape our deeds in relation to others. So these 3 things, you're going to see that in a little while, why this is important. And as we go on to the next slide, I start with an article written by Jennifer Hasty. And the title of this article is Corruption in Ghana. And in this article, Hasty attempts to explain the root causes of corruption in Ghana and why it has become so difficult to fight it. And she says that the mechanisms put in place to eradicate corruption do not work. And then she poses the question, why doesn't the mechanism put in place to fight corruption in Ghana not doing what it is that they're supposed to be doing? And what she does is to get into a detailed understanding of what corruption is. And she says that popular understanding of corruption in public discourse is pregnant. Everybody is anti-corruption. But if corruption is a function of a neoliberal capitalism that generates pleasures, benefits a few people while ignoring the majority, and the state itself corrupt, then the state itself cannot fight corruption. It perpetuates corruption, so it cannot fight it. So then there is a debate of, is there hypocrisy in the West criminalization of corruption? So that's the question she poses. What Hesse is getting at is not that corruption is a good thing. It's that in order to understand corruption, we have to understand how it comes to be. And if the immersion of African societies into a capitalist system did not generate its intended output, which is to promote the well-being of the majority, then those people with access to the largesse of a capitalist system tend to define the narrative. Now, people out of it feel almost impelled to find ways of joining this exclusive class of people living very well, and ideas that support corruption, ideas that support people just getting ahead are then sanitized. So Hessi's position is that popular understanding of corruption in public space differs from private notions of corruption. And once somebody attains a considerable amount of influence, then the means in which they get their wealth becomes easily sanitizable. So they can be removed from being accused of things like theft, of misuse of government property. And then this is really the problem. And the problem is that the state is not a representation of a holistic country. It is a representation of the elites and what they want to do with it. And it has genesis that are foreign. And in that sense, if the state is not having a voice to represent the public, then you can't fight corruption. The state is corrupt. And I thought that was a really interesting article that I read. And this is a very brief analysis of it. But as we go on, you're going to see how this also gets complicated from other articles that I read. And another one is by Fraser McNeil. She wrote this article back in 2009. And the title is Condoms Cause AIDS, which is the outcome of HIV virus. Now, this article borrowed from fieldwork done in northern Limpopo, which is a province in South Africa, the northernmost province in South Africa. And she uses the people who live there called the Venda, and how these Venda people have sort of a contentious relationship with HIV/AIDS workers, mostly Western and those who are Western trained. And the debate here is the question about condoms, and it's particularly layered in this context. One, the fact is that in the Venda community, something like death is seen as an act which is not normal. If somebody dies, then somebody must have caused it. And if HIV causes that large amount of deaths, then it's obviously not a natural act, and people have a natural tendency to distance itself from it. Now, if you use condoms, which allows people to engage in sexual interaction while being safe, but confronting this inevitable thing of death caused by HIV, because remember, South Africa had, like Southern Africa in general, was badly hit by HIV. Then these people who are educating people about safe sex are perhaps vessels of death. So they see them like that. And part of this is a deep history of apartheid, and our apartheid system had kind of brought into itself an understanding of a segregated society where some people, white people, colored people, and Asian people of Asian origin had a much more special place in South African society as compared to Black people. And even within the Black, those who were dark-skinned Black people, which the Venda tend to be, were of a lower rank, and apartheid hit them harder than it hit those, who were a little more privileged in the urban centers. Now, if you think about it this way, they see the aid worker preaching about use of condoms and preaching about safe sex as substituting roles that should be done domestically through aunties, grandparents, and people that are close to them. Now, 18, 19, 20-year-old young people, community development activists teaching about sex are going against the thinking about these people. And in an environment where apartheid has defined how policy and how policy is practiced, it becomes even a lot more contentious. If they are Westerners, if they are Western aid workers, they get to be seen as perhaps an extension of the apartheid system. And if they are Africans or Southern Africans, they are also seen as causes of death because they talk about a disease that is causing havoc. And that now, the article also goes further to talk about how Mbeki, President Mbeki, was denied the existence of HIV. So much as many African heads of states have denied the existence of COVID, famously Tanzanian President John Magufuli. But in Mbeki's denial of HIV, wasn't really rooted on his disapproval of scientific method and science as a constituent of modern society. It was rooted perhaps in how people contextualize ideas of sex, ideas of sexual relations between people. That's what McNeil is getting at. That if we understood how South African societies work in a much more organic way, in an environment of respect, rather than of talking down to people, then Mbeki's denialism, Mbeki's denial of HIV, right, would have not affected people as much. People would have had opportunity to voice out what they were feeling. But aid workers, Western educators, people foreign, talking about very private and contentious things like sex and HIV becomes problematic. But the natives have to own it through their own ways, through their own method. I think that's the main point that Fraser is talking about. Now, the next one, I'm gonna go further on McNeil's argument. So when the people are not denying HIV/AIDS, they're distancing themselves from unnatural causes of death. Sex is a taboo topic. Female sex educators talk about sex openly and encourage the use of condoms. To the locals, the women are carriers of AIDS, and condoms are tools that they use to cause HIV. And an interesting debate here also is the idea of that apartheid system from 1994, ceased from becoming just a government policy. It went on to become an attitude that somebody can carry. So it's not really mostly done by people who consider themselves to be better and much more knowledgeable and sophisticated about the way the world works, to the disadvantage of rural dwelling people or people of color. So the state apartheid policy ceased in 94, but our apartheid attitudes of white South African, of Westerners, of Chinese, Indians, of highly educated Black people and much more prosperous Black people in the community can still exist. And when these attitudes exist in a community, it becomes difficult to convince people who feel left out to adopt some of these policies as advocated. Now, another article that I wanted to talk a little bit is one by Elizabeth Garland called Developing Bushmen. And it has an interesting debate. And on the first part should the Jew or Hoansi be developed? These are nomadic people living in northern Namibia, and they live a highly organic lifestyle that is dependent on the environment where they live. And they live in community. They are isolated from the urban centers. And Namibia is an incredibly developed country by African standard. It has one of the highest GDP per capita in the continent. It's very stable. And the Hoansi or the Jew could have the opportunity to live this lifestyle if they so choose. But there has been an increase in people curious about their lifestyle. Tourists going in there and bringing with them modern comfortabilities and also modern problems to them. So another question should the Hoansi retain their way of life? If these native people are left alone, what is the implication for that? If the natives are included in a much more bigger debate, then what's the implication for that? Now, and Garland brings another debate, which leads me to the conclusion of this presentation, is that Western liberalism, Western ideas of the individual as the center of development and individual rationality, the ability of people to make decisions which is on their best and with their own thinking, is a European political hegemony. The Europeans way of life that has been accepted as the best, which encompasses the last place in the world that are truly free. So he says that Western liberalism is encroaching all over the world, and that in that process of expanding the thinking and the idea of political liberalism, Western thought, Western logic, it enters into spaces that until that point had been true. So we have to see the Hoansi or Hoansi people as really the remnants of freedom. They are the custodians of true freedom, away from the toxic life that people are living. That from our gaze and external gaze, we see them as people who need development. But from a much more intellectual and detailed analysis, they are the only ones free from modern toxic environments, toxic culture, toxic ways of doing things. And it's a very fascinating argument Garland makes, and it could be replicated across all native societies that have isolated themselves. So now, what is development? How does the plight of Hoansi people of Namibia shape our understanding of development? And that's an interesting question that we have no, and I can't give the answer to right now. But what I do have to say is that the three cases of a discussion of corruption in Ghana, a discussion of vendor people and HIV and condoms, and this one of the Hoansi people of Namibia, leads to a conclusion that often we tend to see development as something that is very direct, a simple choice of A and B, or this or that, but it's not like that. It's much more complex, and a detailed understanding will require us to dig deeper, as anthropologists do, onto what forms truths for people, what makes people do certain things. Now that corruption becomes contextualized in Ghana as a question of dividing people between those who have and those who don't, those who have access to power and those who don't, and HIV education becoming an invasion in people's privacy in Southern Africa, and a much more difficult debate of whether the Hoansi people of Namibia should be modernized in court or not. And that's why I'm gonna end this conversation. I want to see your comments. I want to see what you think about it. And if you want me to elaborate further, you could tell me and I will do that. But I would also like to ask you to subscribe on the show and to share it and to continue supporting it by watching it and talking about it. Thank you so much and have a beautiful day.